So good morning. I'm not Tina Diamond, but I've had the pleasure of playing her over the last 2 days at the Project Directors Conference. She's unfortunately sick and could not be with us. So I am honored to give voice to her words this morning that she prepared as an introduction for Marshall. On behalf of the Office of Special Ed Programs, I am honored to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Marshall Peter. He is not only one of the warmest and kindest people I know, but he is also a professional role model to me because he built his career dedicated to improving education and equity for our nation's children and their families. Prior to his retirement in 2015, Marshall served as the CEO of Direction Service Incorporated, a multi-program family support agency for 36 years. He also served as the founding director of Cadre, the OSEP-funded National Center on Dispute Resolution in Special Education, for 17 years. His leadership at Cadre has advanced the field of dispute resolution in special education and strengthened the relationship between children, families, and their educational agencies. I'm introducing him today because I've had the pleasure of working with Marshall as his OSEP project officer for almost 9 years and consider him both a mentor and a friend. What you should know about Marshall, I can tell you that well before his Cadre days, Marshall held a passion for helping others. He earned his MS in special education from the University of Oregon and began serving as a parent advocate in 1976 at Direction Services, where he provided ongoing support and advocacy services to more than 500 families who have children with disabilities. His early work as an aggressive advocate evolved into an interest in developing methods for facilitating homeschool partnerships that are respectful, considerate, and yield equally powerful results for children and families. Marshall is a self-described recovering adversary who has delivered numerous presentations, trainings, and advocacy talks at the national, regional, and local level. Over the years, his commitment to collaborative problem solving has advanced the field of early dispute resolution, leading to dramatic increase in the use of facilitated IEPs and other alternative dispute resolution options. Our appreciation here at OSEP for his work is shared with many others, as is evidenced by his numerous honors and awards. For example, in 2016, Marshall was recognized by the University of Oregon as a distinguished alumnus by earning their National Public Service Award. This award is given in recognition of alumni who have engaged in public service, making substantial difference for people, organizations, or governments through a single influential act or a series of steps that produce positive societal change at a national or international level. We know from our work with Marshall that there isn't a more deserving recipient of this award. It's not really an award, but honor. Given this many accomplishments, one might think that Marshall is an all work and no play kind of guy. However, this is far from true. In his spare time, you can find him out on the disc golf course beating the socks off players half his age. Or you might hear his voice in the airways of KOCF radio, hosting his weekly radio show, Jumping In and Out of the Blues. Marshall describes this show as a genre-bending, palate-pleasing platter of tasty morsels with butt-kicking blues. You'll have to stay tuned on Mondays from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern at stream.kocf.org to judge for yourself. Small advertisement. Back to why he's here today. Marshall's advocacy and unwavering commitment to issues of equity have heightened awareness and access to dispute resolution by our nation's most vulnerable children and youth. Today, Marshall will share with us his story on 45 years in special education and speak to the importance of mentors and describe some defining moments and talk about life lessons. End of Tina's remarks. However, I'm introducing Marshall this morning. And I couldn't help but add a little extra tweak. And I was thinking of some cute little morsels to add about Marshall. And then I had this amazing opportunity at 5 o'clock. I think Kim said things happen at 5 o'clock. Russell Gersten happened to wander over to my table. And he said, "Heard you were going to introduce Marshall tomorrow." And you must have done something good in your career. Lots of good. Okay. Because Russell Gersten claims to be responsible for getting Marshall into special education. And it all occurred in conversations that happened in the 1970s in disco clubs between Russell, Gersten, Hill Walker, and others. And Russell says, I remember Marshall saying, I'm not sure I fit the typical mold for a special ed career or the mold of a researcher. So I'm doing 2 thank yous in my final words of introductions. 1, Russ, thanks for bringing Marshall into special education. And number 2, Marshall, thanks for not being typical. That's right.
Well, that concludes my remarks. First of all, I just have to put in a quick word for Oregon Ducks basketball. I hope you will keep your eyes out. They're going to surprise a lot of people this year. I saw someone with the Oregon sign. The other thing I wanted to do, this is really very intimidating for me to be in front of a group of this size that's filled with so many smart people who have inspired me. And so standing here, my daughter, who's with me, encouraged me to be large. So the problem is that if I really do the full be large leg spread, I may not be able to see over the podium. So I'm going to, I was very surprised when I got this call. I have a men's retirement group. They all discouraged me from proceeding to do this, and yet I was so amazingly honored. Felt like there must be some mistake, and did not want to squander this opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. And so I'm quite delighted to be here. I also know that I've got to pay close attention to time. I believe I have about 35 minutes, and I've tried this a few times, and I'm already behind, so I'll power right in. So what I'm going to do is share with you a few takeaways from my career, and I would invite your patience if some of it kind of seems perhaps mundane or even cliche. Many of you, particularly the folks here from the PTACs and Parent Centers, will be extremely familiar with some of what I'm saying. People who are involved in dispute resolution will be familiar with some of what I'm saying. And so hopefully, at a minimum, it's a useful reminder and you're able to take something out of all of this. What I'm going to do then, I'm going to share some takeaways from my career. I'm going to tip my hat to a few folks who've been particularly generous, and I would include Russell Gersten in that group, although I believe that he has some capacity for revisionist memory. And then I'm going to share just a few concluding thoughts about positive ways to be in the world that are at least influencing me right now. And I suspect that many of you have already incorporated these into your life, but I'll notice them anyway. So at that, okay, so I see what I need to do. You can see it. Okay, hang on just 1 second. I was all set before. Well, let's see. This was going to advance me. So shall I switch to this? Well, what's happening, Vegas? Oh, great. Thank you. So I'm going to see if I can back myself up. Yeah, so this quote has been with me for probably 30 years, 35 years. I've had it on a transparency, and it's really been for me a resounding truth, which is that anything that's worth doing is really worth doing with other people. And in my case, I've been extraordinarily blessed. I've had people who have taken me under their wing and have been with me along the path. And then I've also been able to attract people who have worked with me. And so everything that I've done has been very much done with and as a team. When I knew that I was going to be doing this presentation, I asked my daughter, who's sitting over here, if she wouldn't help me. She then gave me sort of an organizational strategy for how to put these thoughts together and design the PowerPoint. And so it's really, I invited her to come with me rather than simply depending on myself. Now, one of the things that's happening here is that, oh, okay, I'm all synced up now. I'm fighting back the tears. Going way back, I got out of a school, Mount Angel College, which became Colegio Cesar Chavez, with a bachelor's degree in hypnosis, and then spent an extra year and got an elementary teaching certificate. And felt like even though I had this teaching certificate, I did not know the first thing about teaching kids. And I was then wandering around here in Washington, D.C., which is my hometown, and walked into the headquarters of the National Education Association, which at that point in time was a small, unassuming house at the intersection of Wisconsin Avenue and Quebec Street. And I walked in and I said, "Say, is there somebody here I could talk to?" And they said, "Sure, we've got somebody." And so I went into a back room, have no idea who I talked to, but I said, "Hey, I've got an elementary teaching certificate. I don't know how to teach. I'm thinking about going to school. Can you give me a suggestion about what to do?" And they said, "Well, either industrial arts or special education." Well, I had not successfully completed a pad holder in woodshop. I mean, I was sort of the butt of every imaginable joke in the class, and so I went, "Sounds like special education." I then, I'm going, this one is not moving as fast. So I'm not synced up here, but I'll figure that somehow or other I'm going to be okay. Say, Vegas, is there a way you can sync me up? This screen is not the same as that screen. Okay, so let me see if I can work off this one. I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I'm happening. Thank you. Okay, so back then in 1973, I entered the master's program in special education at the University of Oregon. It was quite by chance. Eugene was supposed to be a pretty groovy, I didn't say anything wrong. So Eugene was supposed to be a pretty groovy program, and I entered the program, was really very, very lucky. If you know about the University of Oregon in the middle 70s and up into the 80s and even today, it was an absolute powerhouse of a program. And so I was blessed to enter that program and to be taken under the wing of Herb Preem, who was my advisor and who saw something in me. Herb took me aside and said, "Hey, how'd you like to do a readings and conference?" and invited me to do a readings and conference with him on quasi-experimental design, where he would give me a half dozen studies to read, and then we would meet a week later, and I needed to identify for him all of the confounds I'd been able to find in each study. I loved it, and looking back on Oregon, what I feel like I really learned more than anything was how to think. That's Herb Preem in the middle. At the same time that I was at Oregon, Marty Kaufman, who's on the right, was at the Bureau of Education for the Handicapped. And Marty, I'll just pause for a second and say, please send positive thoughts his and Linda's direction. Marty has Alzheimer's, and it's a struggle for him and for her, and so your positive thoughts are appreciated. At any rate, Marty wrote this RFP for a direction center with the idea being that it would address the fact that families who had kids with disabilities were overwhelmed by what was mistakenly called the service delivery system. But in fact, if you tended even remotely towards the paranoid, appeared to have been organized solely as to discourage its effective utilization. So that if you were a family who had a child with disabilities, you were faced with, and this was sort of a realization, maybe my first 5 or 6 families, and we had a staff meeting, we all started talking, we went, holy smokes, had no idea what a mess it was. And so if you're a family, you have to deal with agencies that represent federal interests, state interests, county interests, municipal interests, private nonprofits, private for-profits, private practitioners. And as you begin to wade in, you discover that there are complex application procedures and baffling eligibility criteria. Agencies are doing things that they've never advertised, no longer doing things that they have advertised, and that within those agencies you have people who are very, very good at their jobs, people that are okay, and then people who aren't so good. And so for a parent that's trying to do all of the sorts of things that a family and parent need to do, to try to deal with this was very daunting, even debilitating. And so what we discovered at Direction Service and what stayed with me has been this notion of a guide who can really help families to make sense out of what really doesn't make any sense at all. And so that was the work that I did for a long time. On your left, you will see Dick Zeller, who has been my lifelong mentor. Dick wrote the original Direction Service proposal, has been a brother. We made hot sauce together, and we called it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dick was Dr. Jekyll, the sort of kind, principled doctor. I was the sort of dark-sided Mr. Hyde, and as you may be able to tell from the pictures, a bit of a management problem. On the other side, you'll see Margaret Burley, who was the head of the Ohio Coalition, a PTAC director. Margaret took me under her wing back in 1982, a very kind of an unassuming Ohio farm woman. You'd never would imagine just how extraordinarily skilled Margaret was. At any rate, Margaret took me under her wings and began to talk to me about the national scene and how to operate nationally. And she, as have many of the other PTAC directors over the years, have become dear friends and colleagues. Moving forward, so the Direction Service was federally funded for until 1982, but then in 1984, I became involved in a string of 3 federally funded grants. George Singer, Larry Irvin, a number of people. They were called the SAFE grants, Support and Education for Families. And what we were doing in those grants was working with families. In the first round, families who had kids that had very severe intellectual and developmental disabilities, and many of whom were nonverbal and aggressive. Second round, working with families who had kids that were deaf-blind. And in the third round, working with families who had kids that sustained traumatic brain injuries. And we're delivering a package of supports, hoping that we might be able to help these families who were dealing with very, very significantly challenging issues, help them to survive might not be the right word, but to succeed under very, very difficult conditions. In that work, there were 2 pieces. This was very, very research-based. Lots of data was being taken on the mental health of the families, on the family function. One of the pieces that was shocking, although shocking and at the same time maybe not surprising, was that the level of clinical depression, the level of suicidal ideation in the moms that we were dealing with was spectacularly higher than what you would expect to find in the general population, that these were people who were really struggling against all odds and were experiencing themselves as being very isolated. The other piece that, as we looked at a variety of interventions, we were training families in stress management, behavior management, providing families with advocacy, hooking families up with respite care, that one of the things that families told us was that they particularly valued the time that they got to spend with other families, that this idea of being in a support group, of being with other people who were dealing with similar challenges, sharing not only the frustrations and the disappointments, but that also the successes, that being able to go parent to parent was extraordinarily valuable. Another mentor, Jay Buckley, some of you will know Jay. He did work in special ed for a while in technical assistance around transition, It went on. Jay and I were in the master's program together. Jay was far more academically inclined than I was and went on and got a PhD in special ed at Oregon and a PhD at Johns Hopkins in psychology. Jay has been a partner, a thought partner, someone who's very, very good at problem analysis, and has also brought a persistently wicked sense of humor to the work, which I think for me, it's been very important to not take myself too seriously. As a real quick sidebar example, Jay, and I'll get into cadre, but one of the things that cadre came up with was, in working with states, was what we call dispute resolution, system integration, and performance enhancement. And so we were sharing all this information, but we were finding that states weren't getting the emails. And we discovered that the reason why was that performance enhancement was, for some reason, being blocked as spam. And so we renamed it Dr. Sipe, but only after Jay had strenuously argued that we should rename it Timmy. And so that's a bit about Jay. So we then, fast forward to 1992, we were federally funded to do an ombudsperson project. And I want to say, it's been for me a real blessing to be supported for most of my career by the Office of Special Education Programs, and that much of my work, that the ongoing theme has been the coincidence of my interests and my work and what was happening at the federal level. In any event, at the Ombudsperson Project, what we were trying to do was to see if we could train ombuds people who would parachute down into angry, inflamed situations, take charge, solve problems, and then those solutions could be installed at a system level. What we discovered was that it was much, much easier to solve problems at a child and family level than it was to solve problems at a systemic level. And in fact, our experience was that, and I really appreciate what Johnny and Kim are saying, and it's a formidable task. Somebody once said that interagency collaboration is an unnatural act performed by non-consenting adults. And so if you take a look, I think that you can get adults to consent far, far more easily, and that's what we saw in the Ombudsperson Project at a child and family level than when you start to move into the systemic level. The other thing that we discovered, and again, no big surprise here, not rocket science, but that cultural, linguistic, and class barriers profoundly negatively impact interaction between families, schools, and agencies, and that we began to develop what we call cultural liaisons, who were people who were from cultures that we wanted to work with, particularly Latino culture, and who could help us to be respectful, to understand nuances, and who at the same time could communicate on our behalf important information that families needed. Midway through the Ombudsperson Project, I went through a personal epiphany. I had devoted most of my career at that point in time to essentially installing my good thinking on top of other people. I'd become a rather aggressive advocate. And three things happened in short, very closely to each other. One was that I woke up in the middle of the night and 3 o'clock in the morning. And when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, at least when I do, sometimes you can be a relatively harsh self-critic. And there's a guy who I see walking around in Eugene, and I'd kind of go, "Hey man, how you doing?" And he'd go, "Shields are not up yet." And so waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, shields weren't up, and the first thing that I saw were the tears streaming down the face of a freshly minted special ed teacher who I had eviscerated at an IEP meeting the day before. And I kind of went, oh my gosh. I mean, the family that I was supporting got everything they needed, except I don't believe that they were particularly happy with how I had conducted myself. And so I kind of went, gosh, you've become a mean, and then I'll let you insert whatever noun you want after that. But I sort of subjected myself to a scathing self-criticism. Second thing that happened was I was trained in mediation and by Anita Engels, who's been another just mentor. Also mentioned here, Anita's dealing with some major health challenges, so a positive thought her way too would be really appreciated. I was trained in mediation by Anita Engels and discovered that it was really possible to go into a room and leave with people in tears, not in tears because they've been treated badly and humiliated, but in tears because they've been brought together around a solution that they valued. And I went, wow, that is so cool. Third thing that happened was that my wife and I ended up in a disagreement about our daughter, Alana, who passed away. At this point in time, we were in a disagreement about her entitlement to extended school year and access to physical therapy services. And in spite of all of the advocacy background and training and reputational power, we couldn't get it figured out, and so hired a team of lawyers and invited the district to go to a due process hearing. And when I lawyered up, we got a couple of outstanding lawyers, and so the district settled with us the day before hearing, and in fact, it gave us everything that we had asked for. They covered all of the attorney's fees. They put new equipment in Alana's school. You would have thought that we would have been kind of apple pie dancing in the streets happy, but we felt really terrible. We were very, very upset by the enormous amount of money that had been spent on our attorney's fees and the district's attorney's fees. We were dismayed. Relationships with related service providers and teachers had been absolutely chilled. People who we considered friends had been advised not to talk to us. The period of time between the request for hearing and the settlement just dragged on forever, put enormous pressure on our relationship. We were very, very nervous about the hearing officer and whether the hearing officer was going to be any better equipped than we in the school were to make a decision. And so kind of went, gosh, this due process hearing stuff, even if you win, you pay a horrible price. And so I asked Scott Brown, who was then my project officer, I said, Scott, I really don't want to do this business anymore about sort of installing my will on top of other people. I'd really like to do a mid-course correction. And this was 2 years into a 3-year project. And I think those of you who had 3-year projects, if you can imagine contacting the department and saying that you'd like to do something entirely different, and is that okay? Well, Scott, bless his heart, talked to the powers that be, and we were allowed to proceed and to, in fact, also got another year. And so what we did was we proceeded with what was called the Conciliation Project. And the Conciliation Project used teams of individuals, diverse teams. Some people were very educated, some people had not had much education, very ethnically diverse, male, female. We put teams of 3 to 5 people together who had a pre-described process that they used to work on disagreements between families and schools, particularly disagreements that had strong elements of institutional racism. What was really good about this was that if, for example, you were working with a Native American family and they had a disagreement with the school, we had the ability to put Native American people on the panel so that when people walked in, they really felt that there was a visible possibility that justice would be done. So in this work with the Conciliation Project, 2 takeaways. One was that the central element in most conflicts is people not feeling heard or respected, and that if you can get each party to unflinchingly declare that the other party fully understands the content and also how they feel about the content, then the heavy lifting is done in a mediation, that people very rarely feel like they've been fully understood. So another kind of a sidebar, and I'm getting mindful of time issues, but I began to work in wraparound, which was essentially wrapping formal and informal supports around families who had kids with serious emotional and behavioral disorders. What the major takeaway from the wraparound work was that interventions acquire significant power when family and youth voice is honored and reflected, and the focus is directed towards strengths. So, as I did that work, I had a chance to begin working with George Sagai and Jeff Colvin, who many of you will know, around a project called WEBS, which was Wraparound and Effective Behavioral Support. And what we began to look at was whether there was a way, working in a local school district, we could kind of weave this notion of incorporating family voice, of sort of strength-based approaches to managing family change with the work that George and Rob and others at the University of Oregon were doing with positive behavioral interventions and supports. And I think we had some really good successes out of that. We submitted an application. George, Russell Gersten, myself, and Jay Buckley submitted an application to see whether there was a way to use these teams, these diverse teams, to negotiate behavioral targets between schools and families, and to also reach agreement about how it was that behaviors could be consequated consistently across settings. Sadly, that application wasn't funded, but things nonetheless worked out. George has been another one of those people who in my life has been extraordinarily generous with his time. He served on the Direction Service Board, and he and I have had many, for me, early in the morning discussions about things that interested me. And so he's been one of those constants in my life, and very, very generous with his time and his smarts. So then, 1998, Cadre is funded, and Cadre, funded as the National Center on Dispute Resolution and Special Education. I have a couple of pictures of Cadre teams up there. I do not have a picture of the current Cadre team, but I do want to be sure that Melanie Reese will raise her hand. Melanie is the director of Cadre, and I would urge you to, if you have a moment, introduce yourself. Cadre is doing just so much amazing work, and I really appreciate Johnny's remarks about return on investment, that really, if you look at the cost of poorly managed conflict, it's outrageous. And we've taken real pride over the last 20 years at Cadre at the size of the footprint that we've left with a relatively small amount of funding. Looking at what we learned from Cadre, there are two major takeaways. One is the vast majority of special education disagreements can be resolved without the use of adversarial procedures. And then second, almost without exception, and this is important, the people involved in special education, that is parents, teachers, administrators, researchers, care deeply about students and are committed to their success. And so I've been to parent meetings where we've talked about the administrator that's been very difficult to deal with, and I've been to NASD meetings and case meetings where we talk about the parent that's very, very difficult to deal with. For me, those are really situations where the branch is incredibly thin, and I've been very well served, and I think others are well served if they assume positive intentions and behave accordingly. Here, for those of you who do not have the Cadre website as your homepage, I just want to put it up for you, encourage you to stop by and check it out. So then, again, mindful of time, I'm going to jump right ahead. Well, first of all, I do really want to thank the Office of Special Education Programs. I have a list of people here. I'm not going to read it. Tina Diamond, though, our project officer, has been fabulous. She is very smart. She's very hardworking. She's given us great thoughts and has also been a superb editor. So it's almost like having another staff member to work with Tina, as have been the lawyers at the department. Lisa Pagano, Hillary Tabor, Jennifer Wolfsheimer have gone out of their way to help us as we try to figure out how to take complex regulations and make them more easily understood. Of course, I want to thank Larry, Ruth, Renee. I mean, the list just goes on and on. The project officers and leadership at OSEP are very smart, very hardworking, and visionary, and it's just been, in the words of the immortal Muddy Waters, a real gas jamming with them. So some then guiding principles for the future. First, listen. I put this first because it's really hard for me, and anyone who knows me would be surprised that I would be out telling people to listen. I'm not a great listener myself. It's really hard work, and if you find yourself in a conflict, it's absolutely the first step that you need to take is to listen. There's a Quaker saying that I love that really then begins to unpeel listening in a way that I think captures its richness. To listen a soul into disclosure and discovery is the greatest service one human can do for another. So I say that one more time. To listen a soul into disclosure and discovery is the greatest service one human can do for another. So then the second piece of advice would be to join support and affinity groups. And I suspect that many of the folks in this room are very actively involved in a number of different groups. When I retired, I formed a men's retirement group, like 9 of us get together every month and really share essential communication. It's been very valuable. I know some of you have had interactions with 12-step groups or know people who've been involved with 12-step groups. Remarkably, remarkably powerful technology. In the times that we're in right now, it's really important to join groups that will speak up on behalf of special education. I think it's, from my perspective, special education is not a partisan issue. Republicans and Democrats alike care deeply about kids with disabilities. And I believe that historically the real power has come from parents, from people with disabilities, from their allies, setting aside partisan quarreling and trying to see if they can't find the one place where they can all speak with the same voice, because it's a very powerful voice. Third piece is to appreciate good work. You know, at the University of Oregon, I recall being told that you wanted to have a praise to criticism ratio of 10 to 1. If you go to the PBIS website or go out and take a look, the Harvard Business Review, and if it's in the Harvard Business Review, it's got to be true, recommend a praise to criticism ratio of 5.6 to 1. What I've found is that it's really, really fun to go out of your way to appreciate good work. And so I seek out supervisors. I've spent a fair amount of time in my career talking to United Airlines. And if I get somebody on the phone from United Airlines who understands my problem, quickly gets me to a solution, they're polite, like to joke around, maybe even end up being Oregon Ducks fans, I'll ask to speak to their supervisor, and I'll get somebody on the phone and I'll go, I have to tell you, the person I just talked to was spectacular. They paid good attention, they solved my problem, they were fun to talk to, and I know that the only way that somebody like that can be successful is if they have supervision that provides a context that really allows them to succeed. So and they, they'll kind of go, what? What? Who is this? And so it's really fun. I think the more creative you can be with praise, just try it. If you get, I occasionally have a chance to talk with Comcast, or I'll walk into a store or whatever. It's really fun to seek out supervisors and to say somebody is doing a really good job. So then finally, choose kindness. Many of you will know Doug Carnine, who was a renowned special education researcher, one of the fathers of direct instruction. Doug is leading a major kindness initiative in Eugene. He's written 2 books, and you're starting to see signs popping up in people's front yards that say, choose kindness. And if you're interested in knowing more, if you give me your card, I'll be happy to have Doug contact you. I mentioned to him that I was going to extend that offer. But I think what's happening is that people all across the country are saying, these are unkind times, and that it's really, if we want to change, it's going to start at the individual level and radiate out. And so Doug is very sophisticated. I helped work a little bit with him on the design of the community initiative, and I think there's 12 subgroups, and every imaginable way that kindness is being cut. For me, what's been has been really, my approach is relatively simple, and that is that I try to have running in the background of my head all the time, what would a kind person do? And, having that subtext running, it sometimes is a little challenging. I can be a bit of a contest driver. And as a contest driver, I might find myself a little bit irritated with another driver, but then I've got that kind of buzz. What would a kind person do? And it's kind of waving people forward. And so I would just encourage you to think about choosing kindness in your life. This is, I suspect, a very kind group of people. What's true about all four of these is that I think that they increase harmony in the world, but they also, and Doug can give you the brain science about how doing a kind act lights up the pleasure centers in your brain. All four of these things, if you practice them, are really fun and they really make you feel good. And so it's really, you are the beneficiary of implementing these behaviors. So, final thought, I'm a difficult person to be married to, and my wife, Susan, has been absolutely spectacular. She's been really helped me to think things through. She's every bit as stubborn as I am aggressive, and she's a wonderful woman. And then my daughter, Hannah, it was for me a profound transition that I would sit at Hannah's feet as I designed this presentation, and that she would coach me and help me to think it through. And it's so cool that she would be here today. So with all of that, I want to thank you. That your work is so important. It's been a real pleasure working with you, and an amazing pleasure working with the Office of Special Education programs. Thank you very much.